Mhm. How successful was the state in addressing these challenges? How important was the state? State resources the state has to ensure this was responsible state Hmm. Hmm. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, Professor.
Yeah, today, well, there are any questions before we start? Anyone has any questions?
How was your Halloween?
Oh, to tell you the truth, I really never celebrate Halloween. I never did. My kids do, of course, but now, my kids are all grown up. But, to me, it's just something that comes and goes, I guess, without me realizing it. I'm not that much of a, I don't know, to me, all this I don't know how to say this, but I'm not too much into, celebrating this type of things, whether it's Halloween, birthdays. I never celebrated my birthday, to be honest with you. I mean, I celebrate my kids' birthdays, but never mine. So, I'm not into someone that, puts too much emphasis on these things. I just happen to, have different priorities, I guess. So Halloween, Christmas, Easter, uh, even, my own um, religious festivities. I'm really not much into that either. So, things come and go to me, I guess, without. I don't know if this is good or bad, but this is how I feel about it, and yeah. So I guess that answers your question. I'm just being honest about it, and
Understandable.
yeah.
Definitely get it. I've
So
stopped
how
dressing
was
up in
your
recent
Halloween? Did
years.
you celebrate Halloween? Did you go out and get a lot of candy or what?
My brother hosted a little party in his backyard, but there were far too many people for me to feel comfortable there.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, again, with the coronavirus, it's very difficult to you know look at these things in a normal way as we used to. We just have to take all different precautions, and unfortunately, it changes the narrative. So yeah, I guess it's just one of those things. Okay, are there any other questions? I guess most of you have looked at the notes that I posted for you for both, excuse me, both chapters 5 and 7. Everyone got those already? Looked at them?
Yeah, we did.
Yes.
Were they helpful or?
Yeah, they were.
Okay,
I pointed them out.
that's good. Yeah, so I'll plan to do this for you for the rest of the chapters. I guess we have 3 more, I believe. Chapter 9. We're gonna skip 8. We're gonna go to chapter 9, and after that, I think we have chapter 11, 12, and 13. So we have 4 more chapters to go, and hopefully I'll be able to do the same that I did for all the previous chapters. Anyway, today we're gonna continue with chapter 7, which deals with the rise and fall of state-led development. And we already started on that last time, but just to summarize very quickly, going back to the notes I have made for you here, is that in this chapter we're simply going to be looking at the function of the state prior to the 1980 and analyze the reasons why the state became less prominent. In other words, what were the main reasons for the state actually failing in its quest for economic development? And then we will look at the types of contradictions that face the state during its development process and how successful was the state in addressing these challenges. So this would probably take us to looking at the economic reforms and the economic restructuring after the ISI, because as these countries, they spend so much money on the ISI strategy, pretty much bankrupted a lot of these countries. And as a result, they had to find some way to get out of that strategy. And that was basically done through the economic reforms or the structural adjustments that a lot of these countries had to go through. Now, we also looked at how dominant the state was in the MENA region. In other words, the state became so powerful during the 60s, 70s, and even till today, by the way, the states are still very, very powerful in the MENA region, even though they have lost a lot of their power, a lot of their control, a lot of their influence, simply because of the economic reforms that these countries had to go through, as well as a lot of the social upheavals that resulted in the Arab uprising or the so-called Arab Spring that began in 2011. So a lot of countries now, or a lot of leaders, political leaders, are pretty much hesitant to, you know, have absolute power. They really feel that it's about time to share some of that power if they want to continue to be in power in those countries. So, you know, the power of the states in the MENA region obviously has declined somewhat, more in some countries than in others, of course. In the 60s and 50s and 70s, as we saw last time, we saw that the state pretty much monopolized all resources. It employed the majority of the labor force, and it pretty much controlled all aspects of economic life, as well as political and social life. And this very power, of course, pretty much had drawbacks. In other words, it backfired. All this dominance, all this power that the state had uh, backfired uh, over the years, and there are many reasons why it did. Basically, you got to look at the elements of the red tape that were created as a result of the sheer size of the state, the administrative paralysis, whereby bureaucracy became inefficient, uh, extremely unreliable. All of that pretty much hit the state real hard, as well as corruption, of course, the lack of accountability, and the role of patronage that the state played. All of these played an important role in weakening the state. So in the in the post-colonial era, leaders in the MENA region were very much interested in transforming their countries from a state of backwardness to a much more modern industrialized state where, you know, the citizens could obviously enjoy a prosperous way of living. So this was basically the goal of many of those leaders. And these leaders, particularly those in the RRLA, sought to achieve economic prosperity simply through the implementation of the Ataturk model. So the Ataturk model was uh, pretty much uh, a model that a lot of the Arab countries in the MENA region tried to emulate. And, you know, just to give you a very brief historic background, I guess, of the Ataturk model and what transpired with the Ataturk model. If you remember last time, we talked about the Turkish experiment under its leader, Ataturk, who was the founder of modern Turkey. Um what Ataturk did was basically he issued a manifesto that contained, I guess, the principles of Atatism. You know, let's just write it here if we can. and then we will probably take it out. Etetism. This is obviously a French word for meaning the state, basically, state intervention. That's what etetism means, state intervention. In other words, the state now becomes extremely important in all aspects of life. And Ataturk basically believed in that. He believed that if a country has any chance or any opportunity of moving forward, of trying to eradicate backwardness, it's through the state. The state is the only one that has the resources and the manpower to be able to actually transform a country from backwardness into a modern state. So etetism basically became the watchword. And that's what etetism really means. So, Ataturk basically had this principle of etetism in mind, and he pretty much felt that etetism will provide legitimacy to the government, if you will, or it will provide legitimacy for strong government intervention. And that's why he had that instituted in the constitution of Turkey, modern Turkey after 1923, when Ataturk was obviously successful in forming modern Turkey. He pretty much put that into the constitution. And also, the modern state of Turkey under Ataturk did not only espouse etetism, but it also did espouse populism, or popularism, if you will. Depends on how you want to look at that. But populism simply means that the masses are basically the object of political and economic policy. That's what populism really means. So according to Ataturk, populism is extremely important because it really puts the masses at center stage. In other words, the country's main goal here is to make sure that the people will be able to have jobs, people will be able to have good earnings, people will be able to have a higher standard of living. So pretty much everything centers around the masses, around the people. So also that was an important aspect of Ataturk vision of a modern state. So etetism, populism, all of these were pretty much important, as well as the distributive issues. In other words, how is income to be distributed among the masses, among the people? That was also an extremely important policy priority for Ataturk. And Ataturk also had other ideas when he formed his new republic. One of his ideas was that there should no longer be a form of government that follows the imperial format or the monarchy format or the presidential format, whereby rule of the state will be inherited from one person to another simply because of kinship or blood or whatever it is. So according to Ataturk, this is really not the way to build a modern state. So according to Ataturk, everything has to be done through the democratic process. In other words, a leader has to be elected by the people's votes. That's the only way you're going to become a leader or you're going to become a president. It's no longer through kinship or through blood or all of that. That's not something that needs to be carried out anymore. And, he was able to obviously institute that in the constitution as well. Now, obviously, Ataturk believed in only one political party, a single party. And he had many reasons for that. And I guess we talked about some of those reasons. One of them is simply that it's a lot easier to achieve or to accomplish all the goals that the state sets when you only have one political party rather than when you have multi-party system. And the reason is simply because with a multi-party system, you're going to have a lot of time, resources wasted in these political parties trying to vie for power and fight each other. And according to the Ataturk model, this is obviously unnecessary. It's a waste of resources. It's a waste of time. And he felt that one political party should be able to, in fact, accomplish all of the goals that the political party sets for itself. And so based on that, he formed his political party, which is called the Republican People's Party, RPP. That's short for the Republicans People's Party. And that was the political party that was formed by Ataturk. And with his party, of course, Ataturk embarked on an economic experiment that was to be pretty much emulated in a lot of the Arab countries in the MENA region. Now, obviously, Turkey's trajectory toward the experiment was pretty much erratic. And the reason for that was because, remember, Ataturk came to power in 1923, and he embarked on a lot of his economic plans in probably the late 20s, early 30s. And that's when you had the World Great Depression. So obviously, his economic plans pretty much faced very, very hard uphill battle, if you will, with the world, the whole world really suffering from the Great Depression. So that was one of the things that Ataturk really had to find a solution to. And also, again, the Second World War. And obviously, Ataturk came out from the First World War where he lost a lot of the land that belonged to the Ottoman Empire. A lot of it obviously was taken away from Turkey by European allies, France, Germany, and Italy, and also Greece. So those were pretty much the countries that took a lot of the land that belonged to the Ottoman Empire. But then again, when you look at the Ottoman Empire, I mean, the land that they had was not their land. It was actually a land that was conquered by them too. So, here you can't say that the Turks lost a lot of land, their land, because to begin with, most of it was not theirs. But most of it they obviously conquered during the rise of the Ottoman Empire. But nevertheless, when Ataturk came to power, obviously he had to work with a very, very small, well, not small, but relatively speaking here, a small piece of land that was left to him from the European allies. And obviously, in that, Ataturk was able to formulate his economic plans. He pretty much, in the 1930s, forced to revise his strategy simply because of the Great Depression. and because of the loss of most of the land that he had left. And he pretty much did a good job if you look at the circumstances and if you look at the financial, economic, and political conditions that he had to face. We can say overall that he did an excellent job in putting the country together, modern Turkey, and he was able pretty much to put it on the right footing. Um, in fact, what Ataturk did was that he was determined from the outset, basically, to promote Turkey's industrialization and also to liberate the economy from dependence on the West. So this was basically what he had in mind, excuse me, when he first started. In contrast to what was, to basically, this was all in contrast to what Turkey was doing before Ataturk basically came to power. So he completely changed all the strategies, and he pretty much encouraged the private sector, by the way. Even though he felt that the state has to play a key role, he did not ignore the private sector at all. He, in fact, encouraged the private sector to actually do its job and to take the initiative in many of the economic sectors. So he pretty much concentrated on the hard, most difficult parts of economic development, and he left the rest to the private sector to take care of, because he felt that you cannot ignore the private sector if you really want to see a successful economic plan develop. You have to do it together with the private sector. The private sector has to be a partner in the development process. And this was basically one of the strong points of Ataturk, in that he did not neglect the private sector at all. And if you remember last time, we talked about the IC Bank. The IC Bank is an important bank in Turkey. It exists still today, by the way, the IC Bank, which is a development bank owned by the government, of course, but it does give a lot of loans to the private sector. It gives a lot of incentives to the private sector, and that IC Bank was very, very crucial in the industrialization process that was put forward by Ataturk. So in 1934, of course, Turkey, as we said last time, if you remember, embarked on its first 5-year plan, which was simply a blueprint for the import substitution industrialization, whereby Ataturk pretty much emphasized local industry. And a major part, of course, of the program was to develop the textile industry, to utilize Turkish cotton, and also to sell to a much larger domestic market. So he was also very, very much interested in creating large domestic markets, because you really can't hope to develop when your markets are very small. So you really have to develop these markets, make them large markets, so as to be able to absorb a lot of the goods that your industry will be producing. And he was very successful in doing that. He was very successful in creating these large markets throughout Turkey. And
Professor, I'm curious,
yes,
when was his first 5-year plan?
it was in 1934.
Thank you.
And obviously, the first 5-year plan pretty much was the first phase of the ISI, because he divided them into phases: the light phase and the heavy phase. The light phase was the first 5-year plan. The heavy phase was the second 5-year plan. That's when really he went into, you know, introducing the production of chemicals and other more sophisticated capital intensive goods, if you will. So that was his strategy. His strategy was not to do it all at once, but rather to do it piecemeal and take it step by step. And also he wanted to make sure that before he goes into all of this, he wanted to make sure that he had the markets in place, this large markets that I just mentioned. Because without having those large markets, I mean, anything that you do is really not going to bear any fruit. So for him, creating this large markets is a huge deal, and it's very, very crucial. And he was able to do that. He was very, very successful in creating these large markets. And again, the easy phase of the ISI, as I said, simply included, simple things, mostly labor-intensive goods such as textiles and food processing, sugar refining, this type of operations, I guess, that are pretty much labor intensive, and they're really not that sophisticated. They're very, very simple. And he started with that, and he called that the easy phase of the ISI. And then obviously he came to the second phase of the ISI, which pretty much included projects in basic chemicals, cement, iron, steel, paper. All of that was, and this was basically adopted in 1938 or late 38. It was adopted, and during that year, of course, over 100 private enterprises were planned with industrial deepening. So you can see that Ataturk was very much involved with the private sector as well. In other words, the IC Bank was very much instrumental in helping these 100 enterprises actually to come to existence. And there was a lot of industrial deepening within the chemicals, engineering, and marine transport. And sometimes Ataturk refers to this as the big push strategy, basically. Now, things started to change in Turkey, of course, with after the Second World War, and of course, a major shift in the political domain occurred in Turkey. In other words, we had a transformation from a single-party system to a multi-party system, with now the Democratic Party winning elections. And this was a heavy blow to the People's Republic Party. The Democratic Party now won elections, and this pretty much changed the political landscape in Turkey. And when I say changed the political landscape, by this I simply mean that Turkey now pretty much transformed itself from etatism to a more liberal economy. In other words, now the private sector has become even more important than the state. In other words, the private sector now has grown very large, and with the help of the people in power now, who pretty much favored a liberal economy, basically, rather than state interventionist, policies. This obviously helped the private sector even more, and also it benefited the commercial farmers and industrial bourgeoisie. So all of these things pretty much came to light after the Second World War with the change in the political landscape of Turkey. But again, I don't want to go too much into the Turkish experiment here, but I think I've given you a good idea of what Turkey went through under the Ataturk era and what he was able to accomplish. So Ataturk was pretty much successful, and he was very much instrumental in building a modern Turkey. And that's the reason why nowadays you go to Turkey, I mean, they pretty much praise Ataturk all the time, friend and foe. It doesn't matter. Those who liked him and those who disliked him, they will all agree on one thing, and that is the huge achievements of Ataturk, because he really had a vision for Turkey, which a lot of the Arab leaders unfortunately don't have. This guy, he really did have a vision, and he was able to implement that vision um, to a large extent, of course. He was very, very successful. And that's the reason why, I mean, you see his pictures in Turkey nowadays everywhere, even though, you know, the guy passed away probably more than half a century now, but still, you see that, you know, a lot of the Turkish people, they admire Ataturk for that reason. Okay, so now let's look
I
at
have one
yes.
last question on the topic.
Mhm.
Do you think it was a natural transition from one model to the next, or was it more like forced, or was it just market mechanics kind of just pushed it to be more private sector, and that was like the goal the whole time?
Exactly, that was it. That was it. There was no force.
Okay, thank you.
Everything obviously, you know, evolved, I guess. This is the word I would like to use. In other words, it was more of an evolution rather than revolution. So everything evolved and everything happened to, you know, fall in place. And this is simply the dynamics, I guess, of moving from one system to another simply because of the right seeds being planted. And as a result, obviously, you are there to enjoy the fruits of those seeds that were planted long time ago. And they were done in such a remarkable, organized, and well thought out fashion that you really didn't need to have any of the um, uh, force or revolutions, if you will, that happens to bring the outcome or the results that the nation obviously was seeking to achieve. So pretty much everything fell in place. And this was, you know, I don't know if you want to call it luck or you want to call it, well, it's not only luck, but it's a lot of hard work, it's vision, it's, you know, implementing the right plans. I mean, all of that is obviously part of it. But, you know, sometimes I don't tend to put luck aside. You know, in a lot of things that we do in life, probably luck also has a role to play. So we can't uh, put luck aside. Luck sometimes, you know, does wonders. But anyway, so this is basically what happened in Turkey. Now, this is basically the reason why in the MENA region, especially the Arab countries in the MENA region, and you know, when we talk about the MENA region, the majority are Arab countries. That's the reason why we're focusing more on Arab countries rather than, we have Turkey and Iran and Israel, basically. Those are the three countries that are non-Arab, but they're considered to be part of the MENA region, of course. The rest, they're all Arab countries. So most of these Arab countries, when they looked at the Ataturk model or experiment, and they saw the success that it was able to bring to the people of that country, they felt, hey, why reinvent the wheel? I mean, we got something there that's working. It worked for Turkey, so why not use it here, implement it to the fullest extent possible, and be able to get the same results. And one of the countries that followed in the footsteps of Ataturk was Egypt. Obviously, we just focus on Egypt here, but there are other 7 countries like Tunis, Syria, Algeria, Iraq, Libya. A lot of these countries basically tried to emulate the Ataturk model. But let's look at Egypt as an example here and see what Egypt has done with the Ataturk model. Now, if you remember, we said that Egypt, under the leadership of President Nasser, now Nasser, of course, came to power in 1956, and he remained in power till 1970. And he passed away in 1970 as a result of a heart attack. He embarked, obviously, on the first 5-year plan from 1957 to 1961. So you can see he was doing exactly the same thing as the Ataturk model, 5-year plans. So why not 2-year plans or 3-year plans or 6 or 10? Or he in fact went with 2 5-year plans. The first one was from 1957 to 1961. Now, this plan had strong emphasis on state enterprise. In other words, he felt that, hey, the only way out of the backwardness is through estatism, state intervention. And with state intervention, you have to have state enterprises, SOEs. So through its ISI strategy, the state was able to generate 1 million jobs and was able to achieve very high growth rates at the time of 6%, which was considered to be rather high for a less developed country like Egypt, extremely poor, not much resources. So, the state started on the right track, in fact, with this huge level of employment and a decent growth rate. And obviously, in the first 5-year plan, Nasser was pretty much successful in creating lightweight industry, highly labor intensive. So he pretty much did exactly the same thing as Ataturk. Now, Egypt, of course, does grow a lot of cotton, and the Egyptian cotton is known worldwide to be of high quality. And obviously, having cotton, that makes sense for Egypt to promote its textile and clothing industry. And that's exactly what happened. So pretty much he emphasized those industries. Now, the second 5-year plan, which started in 1962 to 66, included some of the most ambitious projects, such as the Aswan Dam, that was built to provide electric power for the industrial complex, because remember, Nasser, in the second 5-year plan, he was very much interested in creating and establishing heavy industry. Now, that heavy industry is going to require a lot of power, electric power, basically. And they would be consuming a lot of it. So President Nasser had to find a way to actually make that available. And he felt that the only way to do this is through the S1 dam. So the S1 dam project was pretty much instrumental in not only providing electric power, but also irrigation water for the agricultural sector. And together with the River Nile, of course, the S1 dam worked extremely well because you had the flow of water from the Nile River, which is, I guess, the second largest river in the world, if my memory serves me correctly. And that passes through Egypt, of course, Egypt and Sudan, Ethiopia, and so on. It goes all the way up to Kenya. But this was very, very important for Egypt because it was able to obviously help the S1 dam for the water to be stored in the S1 dam, and from there obviously be able to generate electricity and also to use that water for the agricultural sector. Because Egypt at the time during Nasser, the agricultural sector was never neglected. And he was able to put that to use as well. So a large steel complex was built in Helwan. It's a city in Upper Egypt called Helwan. He was able to actually build a very large steel complex and also a large fertilizer plant in Aswan, close to the Aswan Dam. So he was pretty much on track to make Egypt an industrialized state and to obviously eradicate a lot of the backwardness that Egypt was subjected to under colonial rules for such a long time. And so again, Nasser's contribution to transforming Egypt's economy and society from a backward to a relatively modern industrial economy cannot be ignored. He was able to achieve all of this under very difficult circumstances, both political and financial. Political, of course, because you had the Muslim Brotherhood, who were actually bent on killing President Nasser and getting rid of him because they felt that he was not a good leader in terms of not instituting the Islamic Sharia laws, and they felt that he was more of a socialist. According to the Muslim Brotherhood that was growing in strength at the time, really presented a lot of problems for Egypt. And obviously, President Nasser ended up putting a lot of the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood in jail, and he executed some of them. And obviously, all of this made things worse for Egypt. So, from the political point of view, Egypt was really not very, very stable with what was going on. And to make things worse, Egypt, of course, was involved in a very short war, I guess, in 1957, when Britain, France, and Israel attacked Egypt. And the reason why Egypt was attacked was simply because President Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal. And he also nationalized a lot of the agricultural land that belonged to British farmers and French farmers. Because remember, Egypt used to be a British colony. So the British, they pretty much owned a lot of the agricultural land in Egypt. And as a result, when Nasser came to power, he said, well, this is really not going to continue. We're going to nationalize these things in Egypt. And, they would fair compensation obviously will be given to all those who prove that they actually paid for that land. In other words, they did not take it simply because they were the colonizers. Um, and the Suez Canal, the same thing. So obviously these countries felt that their interest was threatened. Now, I don't know what was going on with Israel. Probably Israel doesn't need any excuse to attack Egypt. They just felt that, hey, no, this is an opportune time to go in with France and Britain and attack Egypt and destroy all the armaments and the military capabilities that Egypt has, so as to ensure that Egypt may not attack Israel in some in the future, I guess. Probably this is what the Israelis had in mind when they joined Britain and France, because other than that, I mean, what's the reason for Israel to attack Egypt at that time? Basically no reason at all, except to make Egypt more weaker. But anyway, so then, President Nasser had to face a war against those three countries, and luckily for him, the U.S. intervened under President Eisenhower. And at the time, President Eisenhower gave an ultimatum to all three countries to halt hostilities against Egypt. And obviously, those three countries agreed, and as a result, things were pretty much ironed out um, under negotiations, I guess, for the Suez Canal and what have you. So they reached some sort of agreement under the auspices of the US, I guess. So President Nasser was lucky. He was able to get away with that. Otherwise, if the war continued, probably the whole Egyptian economy will be in ruins. But luckily, he was able to get the US to intervene, and as a result, he was able to get out of that. So this was a huge problem that President Nasser faced, and as well as the political Islam problem that I talked about, the Muslim Brotherhood, which obviously were very much interested in liquidating President Nasser. In fact, there were 3 or 4 attempts on his life, and they all failed by the Muslim Brotherhoods. But so you can see that there was a lot of tension inside Egypt, political tension. And then to cap it all up, you had the 6-Day War in 1967. This was the straw that broke the camel's back. In fact, the 6-Day War that Israel waged over Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. It was a surprise attack. It was all done in probably the first day, because what Israel did, it took all these 3 countries by surprise. It attacked in the early dawn of the day, completely destroyed Egyptian Air Force. And when you destroy the Egyptian Air Force, then that's it. That's it. So it's all over. It's gone. There's nothing you can do, because now Israel has air superiority. And with air superiority, what are you going to do? How are you going to fight? There was just no way that Egypt can fight. They tried to fight in the Sinai Desert, and it was a massacre, basically. I mean, the Israeli Air Force completely annihilated the Egyptian forces, ground forces, armed forces. So it was a complete massacre. I mean, if you go back and Google the 1967-day war, and you see exactly what happened during that time, it's just, it's very difficult to watch. That kind of massacre that And as a result, of course, President Nasser felt that he had to resign, and in fact, he did give his resignation. But because of his popularity, not only in Egypt but in the whole Arab world, they would simply not let him resign. I mean, you had millions of people in the streets, not only in Egypt, all over the Arab world. That's how popular Nasser was to the Arabs. Now, again, as I said, now some Arabs may hate him, some Arabs may love him, but the same thing with Ataturk. He did a lot of good things for Egypt, whether we like it or not. I mean, we have to um, call a spade, I guess. And, you just can't have your emotions put into the whole thing. You just have to be objective. And when you look at these things objectively, you find that Nasser pretty much did a lot for Egypt, given the circumstances. And we will see exactly what happened after the death of Nasser in 1970. Then you had Anwar Sadat take over from Nasser in 1970, and Anwar Sadat was the president of Egypt from 1970 to about 1981, when he was obviously assassinated by a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. Um, and then after that, of course, you had Hosni Mubarak from 1981 to 2011. And Hosni Mubarak was ousted by the people of Egypt in the 2011 Arab uprising. But we will see what each leader did, Anwar Sadat and Hosni Mubarak, and compare their achievements to that of Nasser. And you will see that both Hosni Mubarak and Anwar Sadat achievements were really, um, you cannot compare, in other words, their achievements with that of President Nasser. They fall short of what Nasser achieved. And remember, Nasser was there for about close to 10 years, I guess, in power or so, or 12 years. And you see Hosni Mubarak from 1981 to 2011, that's over 20 years. Anwar Sadat, was in power as long as Nasser was, 10, 11, 12 years. But both of them, if you look at their achievements, it's pretty much dwarfed by Nasser's achievements. Again, that's what it is. And now, what did state-led growth do for the MENA region? Well, look at some of the things that state-led growth. In other words, we can't say that state-led didn't do anything. Yes, it failed, but it also did a lot of good things. In fact, you can see that state-led growth achieved a rapid increase in per capita income. It obviously was responsible for all the structural information to start to take shape in most of these countries. It's only through state-led growth that you had all of this structural information starting to take shape, because without state-led growth, you would really not be able to see these structural transformations take off. So it really made the structural transformation a lot easier to implement. And then, of course, the success in addressing many of the issues that are related to backwardness. So in terms of human development, the state invested huge amounts of money in education and in health. So that's really an important foundation, if you will, for eradicating backwardness. And the state was very much instrumental in all of that. Now, all of the above were undertaken in an environment that was impeded by rapid population growth. So obviously the state had a lot of challenges also. In other words, not everything was easy for the state. They had a lot of challenges as well. So sometimes, we tend to put the blame on the state. Oh, the state is not doing enough, or there's corruption. Or yes, all of that is true. But at the same time, we also have to realize and understand that nothing comes easy. And the state really had to face a lot of challenges. And one of them is the rapid population growth, huge defense expenditure, especially for Egypt and Syria and Jordan, because those three countries obviously were bordering Israel, and Israel would not shy away from a war, because it knows that when there is a war, they're gonna be able to completely defeat the other armies. So they would try to bait the Arabs into a war, always. This has happened in 1967. The only war that Israel really did not start was the 1973 war. Other wars, they were all started by Israel, and for good reason. The reason is simply because, hey, if we start a war, we're going to win the war, and we're going to, occupy more land. So why not? And this was the Israeli mentality at the time, of course, is trying to get as much land as possible. Because, if you look at the map, um, the state of Palestine, or Israel as it is called now, it's extremely small compared to the population. You have the Arab population and you have the Jewish population. Probably, they are 60-40, maybe. I don't know. I haven't looked at the recent demographics, but, it's somewhere there. 60% Jewish, 40% Arab. I'm talking about inside Israel here, in Israel proper. But then, of course, you have the West Bank and you have the Gaza Strip. Now, if you include those two with the Arabs that are populated within Israel proper, then obviously the Arabs are the majority. But right now, of course, Israel, geographically speaking, it's a very, very small, given the population size. And for them, obviously, if they can expand, it makes it a lot easier for them. And that's exactly what Israel is doing. I don't know if you are following what's happening in the Middle East, but you know that Israel right now is trying to capture most of the West Bank and the Golan Heights of Syria. And the reason why they want to do that is simply because they feel that they need the land. Land is very important for Israel. And so they have taken a good chunk of Syria, the Golan Heights, and they have also taken a good chunk of Palestine, the West Bank and the peripheries as well. And this makes it extremely difficult for peace, obviously, to take effect in that region. It's not going to happen. I know this for sure. And the reason is simply because of the inequality between Palestinian rights and Israeli rights, if you want to call them. And you have a lot of Israelis, by the way, who know this. They know that the Palestinians have been subjected to, a lot of injustice. You have a lot of Israeli writers write about these things, not Arabs, but Israelis, Jews, in fact, write about what the Israelis are doing to the Palestinians in terms of human rights, violation of human rights. And even though Israel is a democracy, but it's only a democracy for the Jews and not the Arabs. So the Arabs, obviously, inside Israel are, and here I'm talking about Arab who are citizens of Israel. In other words, they hold an Israeli passport. They are Israeli citizens. I'm not talking about Palestinians living in Gaza and in West Bank. That's something completely different. that makes things even worse if we want to talk about the life that those people are living. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the Arabs who are living within Israel, Arabs who have the Israeli citizenship. Those are not enjoying the same rights as the Jews who are living in Israel, in the state of Israel. And these are not my words. These are the words of Israeli writers, Jewish writers in Israel. So, I mean, when we talk about peace in the Middle East, at least as my opinion and as far as I can see, I don't think it's going to happen. It's going to take some time, and um, you know, people have to understand that you can't have peace when people are not treated equally. You can only have peace when people are treated equally with the same rights. That's when you can have peace. Other than that, you simply, it's just impossible. Anyway, so, again, huge defense expenditure, limited national resources with the exception of oil, and you have low level of literacy, and you have political instability in the region. So you can look at all of these things, and these things are, I mean, it's not easy to overcome all of these difficulties. These are obstacles for any country, basically. And the Arab countries in the MENA region are facing these tremendous difficulties or obstacles. And as a result, it makes their work a lot more harder. Now, in 1980, the Egyptian government employed 1.2 million workers with a wage bill that's equivalent to 20% of its GDP. The public sector in Egypt accounted for 30% of GDP. Government revenues and expenditures accounted for 40%, this is very, very high, and 60% of GDP respectively. Can you imagine government expenditures about 60% of GDP? Now remember from your principles of macro, when you look at GDP, GDP is equal to consumption plus investment plus government expenditure plus net exports. If you look at any industrialized developed country, you will find that GDP at the most will account for 22 to 25% of GDP. At the most. Look at Egypt here, 60% of GDP is government expenditure. Well, that simply means that the government looms large in the decision-making process and in the economy as a whole. So this amounted basically to a budget deficit of 20% of GDP. That's extremely high to have a budget deficit of 20%. Okay, so in the early 80s, it became evident that state-led growth is becoming untenable or unsustainable due to many of its contradictions, such as state-owned enterprises failed to generate profits and as a result drained much of the state's resources. Why? Because the government had really to put a lot of money to keep them afloat because all of these SOEs were a failure. And in order to keep them afloat, the government had to divert a lot of the country's resources towards the SOEs. And then you had heavy industry growing so fast and so rapidly at the expense of light manufacturing, which in this case, obviously, they did not do it the way that the Ataturk model did. In fact, first you need to start with light manufacturing and then only at the end start with heavy industry. But for the countries in the MENA region, their ISI stipulated that heavy industry was the way. And they pretty much concentrated on heavy industry relative to light manufacturing. So that was another problem there. Poor capacity utilization and production inefficiency. So in other words, you're building this heavy industries, but then again, you're ending up in producing very little because your market is so small. So this leads to complete waste, economic waste, production inefficiency, and poor capacity utilization. You're really not utilizing the capacity to its fullest. This is a problem. Also, failure to build an economy on competitive grounds. So really not much attention was given to enhance the functions of markets based on demand and supply. And as a result, these markets were really not behaving according to competitive conditions, which makes it a lot more difficult for these countries to produce and export their domestic products, because everything is not built on highly competitive markets. And competitive markets means efficient markets. Also, these countries were pretty much overwhelmed and overextended in their ability to manage and control a diversified economy. In other words, it became so difficult really for them to be able to manage and control a diversified economy. They were simply not prepared for all of that. And also, the creation of new social actors and interests that drained much of the nation's resources towards achieving their own interests. And here, what we're referring to basically, we're referring to crony capitalism. And this was really a huge drain on the economies of the MENA region. And because crony capitalists basically were able to get a lot of funding from banks and other institutions, not because of the projects that they had, whether they are efficient or not, but simply because of wasta. Now remember, wasta in Arabic simply means who you know, basically. And the crony capitalists were pretty much close to the leaders and to the political leaders, basically, and to the ruling elite. And because of that, they were able to get a lot of loans for projects that were completely inefficient. And this obviously does not vow very well for the development process. And then, of course, the inability to reduce the twin deficit. In other words, these governments ended up with a huge budget deficit, and they ended up with a huge trade deficit. These two deficits can be killers of any economy. They are simply not sustainable. And the more of those that you have, in other words, the larger the deficits that you have, the more weakness that you will be able to put on your economy, basically. So it's very important to find ways to address the twin deficits, because those twin deficits will just continue to drain your economy. And you just can't afford to see that, because it will cut economic growth tremendously. and will lead to huge unemployment. And those are simply some of the things that countries in the MENA region cannot afford to have. So again, all these failures that we just talked about that arise from the mismanagement of the ISI and the public enterprises led to huge resource gaps in both resource-rich labor abundant and resource-poor labor abundant. And this gap was filled, obviously, by foreign borrowing. That's the only way out, is to borrow money to be able to close these two gaps, which meant that international lending agencies will now place demands on policymakers to move towards structural reforms. And this is exactly what happened in the MENA region during the mid-80s to late 80s. A lot of pressure was put on decision makers, policy makers, to actually take the route of structural reforms. This obviously, in turn, will carry with it huge costs in terms of popular uprisings and also political instability. Now, the question here, of course, is, are leaders in the MENA region ready to embark on such a dangerous path? And the answer, of course, is no. Why? Because many leaders in the MENA region are not eager to take such action. And most of them have tried their best to postpone and delay these reforms as much as possible. That's why, instead of having these reforms take effect in the early to mid 80s, we only saw a lot of these countries embark on these reforms in the late 80s and early 90s. And that's why we always refer to this as the lost decade, those 10 years. In other words, when countries stopped using the ISI strategy and wanted to move on to a different strategy, which is export-led growth. Now, in that period, between leaving the ISI and entering the export-led growth strategy, we refer to it as the lost decade. That's the period when these countries should have embarked on structural transformation or structural reforms. But obviously, a lot of these leaders were very, very scared to make such a move because they know it will mean the end of their rule. And so let's look at structural adjustments here and what we mean by these structural adjustments and economic reforms. Now, obviously, as I wrote here, the timing, the pace, and content of these structural reforms that began in most of the MENA region during the late 80s and early 90s was very different from one country to the other. These reforms included the following changes. Number one, reducing public expenditure. This was the first thing that the IMF and the World Bank recommended for these countries to do. You have to reduce your public or government expenditure. You can't be running this huge government expenditure for a long time. It's going to be deadly to the economy. So the first thing, you need to reduce public expenditure. Slash down on all programs, social programs, and other government programs, basically. And replace that with stimulating private investment. In other words, let the private sector take some of the heat off the government. In other words, they really wanted the government to take the back seat and let the private sector be the lead in the development process. So you need to stimulate private investment. You need to encourage private investment. You need to make sure that um, private businesses have the right environment, the right conducive environment to actually start investing in different projects. So they need help, and the government has to give that help. Removing subsidies on consumer goods, liberalizing foreign trade, which means reducing tariffs and eliminating subsidies. So, this government should no longer use the argument that they need to protect infant industry by putting huge tariffs. No, you need to take that. And also, you need to eliminate all the subsidies you are giving to your industry and to your farmers. And also, you need to stimulate the export industry or the export center, if you will, by giving them more incentives to export goods to the outside world. So you need to pay a little bit more attention to the export sector. And then you have to attract foreign direct investment. You have to be able to make sure that you can actually get uh, foreign governments as well as foreign businesses to invest in your country. And then you have to strengthen the rule of law and property rights, because this really goes hand in hand with attracting foreign direct investment. If you can't strengthen the rule of law and property rights, you can never hope to have foreign direct investment. So all of these obviously were the structural adjustments or the economic reforms that were demanded by the global financial institutions such as the IMF and the World Bank for them to continue to give help and support to the countries in the MENA region. Otherwise, if they don't start with these economic reforms, they're really not going to see any help. And, they're going to fall more and more. In other words, they're going to drown more and more. And, some countries did obviously take that initiative and they started on their economic reforms and were able to, see some improvement. Not a whole lot, but there was some improvement that came as a result of the economic reforms. And again, we will be able to talk next time on why these economic reforms did not succeed in many of the Arab countries. So we will leave it right there. Any questions?
No questions. I just want to tell the class that I'll be putting my copy of the notes from today on the Discord. There ended up being like 3 extra pages from what you were talking about that I just wrote down that
Very
wasn't
good.
in. So I'll just be linking it in the Discord and y'all can go and download that or see it. Just added notes.
Good.
Thank
Excellent.
you.
Thank
Very
you.
good.
Joe.
Okay. Anyone else?
Professor,
Yeah.
for
Yes.
the next, I think in 2 weeks or one, we have to present again. Are you gonna divide the questions depending on the group, or are all the questions going to be presented?
That's a very good question. Yeah, I'm going to look into that. And when is the next presentation?
It
I think
says
it's on the 10th.
10th and the
10th of this
12th.
month?
Yes.
Next Tuesday.
That's getting very, very close. So I really need to, yeah, so I need to obviously look at the topics and assign topics to the groups. The groups are going to stay the same. Okay, there's not going to be any change in the groups. So you're going to have the same groups like you had before. And all what I need to do is simply assign the topics. How many topics did I give you? 2 or 3?
It was 3 last time.
3? Okay, so yeah, we will stick with 3, but I will probably, and I think there are about 12 groups, right?
I
If we,
think there's 13.
yeah, I think we have 12 groups, I guess. So I would say the first 4 groups will do the first topic, the next 4 groups will do the second topic, and the third group will do the third topic. I'm sorry, yeah, we're gonna divide them into 12 group. I mean, there are 12 groups, I guess, and the first
I
again.
think there are 9 actually.
There are 9 groups.
Well, that's only on the group list document. There could
Yeah.
be others that aren't on that list, but I'm only counting 9.
That's why, yeah, that's why I need to go back and look at it and see exactly how many groups we have and how many questions we have. So pretty much, I'm gonna have the first 3 groups do the first topic if we have 9, and the second, group. In other words, I'm going to divide them into 3 groups. So we're going to have the first 3 in one group, the second 3 in the second, the third 3 in the third group. That's if we have 9 groups. And then, I will just divide those questions accordingly. So the first question will go to the first 3. The second question will go to the next 3, and the third question will go to the final 3 of the group. So this is basically, this is just to help you out here, because I know we don't have much time, so at least you know which topics to start on.
But Professor, can we push the presentation the week after? So maybe on the 17th?
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, we can
Okay,
push it. I
perfect.
guess we have to, because I guess we don't have much time right now,
Yeah,
since you don't know what. Yeah, let's push it
yeah,
to
that
the
would be great.
17th.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's push it
Thank
to
you,
the 17th.
Professor.
Okay, no problem. And I guess, what is Thanksgiving?
It's
Is it?
that
Oh,
week, I believe.
oh, okay.
No, it's the following week. So it's the
Yeah.
26th.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good, because I really would like to get this done before Thanksgiving. I
Yeah.
mean, otherwise we're gonna have a problem. Yeah, that's fine. On the 17th will be
Okay.
fine.
Great. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Any other questions? So
Thank you
please
so much.
let those people know who were not with us today that the presentation will be moved to the 17th. You can put that on the notes that you're going to be attaching to this one here, so that students would know that. Okay?
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you so much, Professor. Have a great week.
No problem. You too. Take care now.